We focus a lot on cybersecurity awareness training, but what about security training for IT teams? We hear about vendor training for specific technologies like firewalls and VPNs and endpoint detection, but what kinds of security training do IT teams really need in order to understand their roles and responsibilities? Well, today in our Cybersecurity Awareness Forum, number 44, we're honored to have Chris Ellis as a guest joining us from Circadence, which is a company that does a ton of security training for IT professionals. So I'll ask Chris to introduce himself in a minute with a short bio and get us started. But I want to welcome everybody to this session. It's an open collaboration group. If you haven't been involved in a session before, we're all pretty much passionate about security awareness and human risk management, no matter what role we're in. It's brought to you by ClickArmor, the first cybersecurity training platform designed to fill the gaps between training delivery and assessment so you can have a more resilient security culture. I'm Scott Wright, CEO and Chief Engagement Officer at ClickArmor, and I help teams build a strong and positive security culture. Before I introduce our guest panelist, I'd like you all to type in the chat, if you're here on our live session, where you're coming from around the world. It helps us just appreciate the international presence we have, and also gives you a little bit of practice entering stuff in the chat, so you're not too shy to do that later. A little ulterior motive there. So I'm going to do a quick round table of who is joining us or from where. We have Matt from Thornton, Colorado, Michael from Albuquerque, New Mexico. Great. Shelly, can't remember where Shelly said she's from, but I think it's like in the east somewhere. Cayman Islands. Awesome. Sean.
Nice.
Calgary. And we have Ohio, Shelly. Thanks, Shelly. And Mark from Minneapolis. Awesome. Thanks very much, everybody, for letting us know where you're coming from. Today, as I said, we've got our guest is Chris Ellis. So I'm going to ask you first to just share your intro, and then we'll move on into the session.
Yeah, sounds great, Scott. Yeah, first of all, thanks for inviting me. I love this. This kind of live interaction is fantastic. So I'm at Circadence. I've been here for 2.5 years now. But prior to that, I spent 15 years at McAfee. A lot of people called it McAfee for reasons that still aren't clear to me. But 10 years as a system engineer, which you're probably aware is the technical part of the sales team. So I did all the presentations, whereas the sales guy was the one with the nice watch, took everybody to lunch and golf.
Played
and that
golf,
kind of
and yeah.
got the big commissions. Yeah. But that was really fun because I was really getting that was a great chance to just sit with customers, work with them really close in real world cybersecurity situations. And then I spent 5 years as part of the global pre-ops team, which meant I was supporting the SEs globally with programs to help them enable them do their jobs better. And prior to that, actually, I was good 10 to 15 years as a consultant working in Ottawa as a network security consultant, then as an IT security consultant, and that IT security became cybersecurity. So yeah, that's my background. Yeah.
When did that happen? When did IT become cyber? What was the exact date?
Boy, I'll say during my tenure at McAfee for sure. Suddenly everything was cyber, right? So I'd say I don't know. I joined McAfee in 2006. I'd say that's pretty close to it. Wouldn't you agree? That's kind of when cyber started to evolve.
Yeah, it started to creep in then. Yeah, for sure. It was not as widely used certainly as it is now, but cool. So I'm going to, as usual, share my screen for a few minutes and just help people understand what we do in these sessions. We do record the session. We get automated transcripts from them. We create blog posts. We repurpose some of the content. We create a really nice, it's about a 20-page CISO report on security awareness every quarter that's built from these sessions. So it's got some really nice comments, insights, and challenges, and how people are dealing with them. So I invite you to download the report for free. There's no sign up required or anything. But you can also join our Cybersecurity Awareness Forum community, which is just a place where we post the recordings from these sessions and try and generate some more discussion and collaboration. You'll see over 100 people there now that are joining these sessions and just want to be a part of that team. So happy if you can join it. That'd be great. So as usual, I start with a little bit of context for this topic, and I'm going to let Chris sort of go into some of the points that he wants to raise about training for IT teams that from the perspective of what he's been doing for the last several years. So I'll let you speak to some of these slides, and you can let me know when I should move on.
Yeah, sounds good. Technical skills, soft skills, all good stuff. Evolving landscape drives. Training for IT teams is a little different for sure compared to what I would call the non-technical employees. I think the non-technical employees really benefit from what you're doing at ClickArmor for sure, right? I mean, I think it just needs to be done more, and I think it needs to be done to the general public as well. How many times have I watched in the local news somebody's gotten scammed out of their life savings, and it's because they're clicking on stuff or they're answering calls that just don't make any sense.
Mm-hmm.
I just saw one last week, and it just blows my mind. This poor lady, she was an elderly lady, and she gets called about, oh, it's technical support. There's a problem with your computer, and can we have access to it? So it started off with her having to pay a couple $100s, and it ended up her losing 100,000. So you have to, at some point in your mind, you wonder how somebody couldn't make that transition to say,
Yeah.
the laptop's worth $600, maybe $300. So maybe I'll just throw it out and buy a new one for the cost this is starting to amount to. So that kind
Yeah.
of trust is unbelievable. And that lack of security awareness blows my mind on the general population. But
Yeah.
we'll see that, coming back to the topic at hand,
Mm-hmm.
it needs to be happening more and more within organizations. So that's something that you folks do at ClickArmor that I think is brilliant.
Mm-hmm.
What I see, I'm sort of on the other side of the coin. I think we're kind of very complementary what we do. And there's a lot of reasons why. I have three main reasons I'd like to briefly talk to about why I
Yeah.
think IT teams seem
Mm-hmm.
more vulnerable. And I think one of them is because of just overconfidence to some degree. I was just watching, I'm a chefy at heart.
Yeah.
So I use chefy analogies, but I was watching Top Chefs just the other night. And these are experienced chefs on this show. Boom, one of the cooks sliced their hand really hard. And
Ooh.
it's just that overconfidence. As an IT person, you can have like, I got this, I know this, I can't be fooled. But every now and then, if you take your eye off the ball, you're going to have that knife slice into your hand and it's going to catch you bad in the case of Top Chef. But in the case of what we're talking about, it means that your network could get compromised. So I think that's part of it. So having them even take security awareness on a regular basis is just darn good to keep them thinking about, never take your eye off the ball. Otherwise, it's going to result in something terrible. But a better reason, perhaps, has to do really with the change in the industry. What we knew, I'm just going to use SIM as an example. And really what I'm trying to say here is how things are changing at such a rapid pace, technology-wise, that if you don't stay abreast of it, you're going to fall behind and you become vulnerable just because of the lack of knowledge, right?
Yeah, and actually, can I just sort of add a point here?
Of course.
There are a lot of people, maybe many on the call actually, who are just starting to get into cyber, and
Hmm.
it seems kind of overwhelming. And
Oh, yeah.
the whole idea of where do you start and what is the landscape before you start diving deep into any particular technology, right?
It's so true. I was just speaking about this on a workshop last night, actually. Because you mentioned that, oh, there's the vendor training you have to take as an IT professional, cyber professional. And that's true. And that can be overwhelming because some companies have multiple products. So they're trying to learn this vendor's product. They have to learn that vendor's product. There's just all that, the hardcore learning of how to use the tools, let alone overlaying on that consciousness of vulnerabilities and tactics that are being, evolving out in the marketplace,
Hmm.
out in the real world, I should say, in the wild. That's a challenge. So forget about just having to learn the hard tactics of using the tools. That's an important part of it, but you have to also be the cyber aware. And as an example, I'm going to talk about SIM because SIM, going back, the
One
news.
one
Please go.
second.
You cut me off anytime.
Let's define SIM for
Sure.
some people who may not be all that familiar with it.
Yeah, great. And please do continue to interrupt me as we go through this. A security information and event management tool. SIM is kind of like a higher arching tool. It's an overseer. Many things feed up into it, log files from your firewalls, your intrusion prevention systems. So all that network perimeter hardware feeds into this. Pretty much anything on the endpoints, all the data, whether it's in the cloud or endpoint, anything that seems to be out of context or, you know, feeds it up to this master SIM. So it's like this, think of it like a football size database. It's huge. And that's the challenge, is trying to find useful things. So SIMs traditionally were used and are used as the overarching view of anything that's going bad. Things will bubble up to the SIM. It'll say, hey, I'm seeing something suspicious here. But to my point, going back even 10 years, 5 years, to be a SIM expert, you had to be like an SQL expert, probably had to be, and there's other languages too, right? There's MQL, Microsoft has KQL. So
Wow.
depending on which vendor you're using, there's all kinds of those query languages you probably had to be an expert in. Probably were a Splunk guru as well.
What about
Um,
Yara? I heard about Yara. I
hey,
don't know what Yara does really, but I've heard about it.
yeah, yet another, what does it stand for? I forget off the top of my head, but
Yet
yeah,
another something.
yeah, to your point, there's a plethora of all that stuff, right? And to be a specialist in all that, big challenge. Now, I was talking with a colleague, so I've seen this shift, by the way, from CrowdStrike as well as SentinelOne. Those are firsthand observations. They talk about AI now. Everybody's talking AI. A good friend of mine, Michael, was Michael Leyland from SentinelOne. He was at RSA a couple of weeks ago. And he said if last year's big thing at RSA was XDR, extended detection and
Yes.
response, this year's big thing is AI. And I'm just seeing this. Everybody's talking about AI and how it's coming into play now is because the SIM again of yesterday, where you had to be that Splunk guru, that SQL, that any kind of, it's kind of going away. And it's more the next generation coming up are people, I don't want to say kids, but younger people who have used Google extensively, right? So they know how to ask questions intelligently to get the answers they wish. And that's really the next gen SIM that we're seeing, right? So we're
Mm.
seeing how it's more of an AI conversation. You position the question and it'll bubble up and get the information you want. So just that shift alone is remarkable because you have to train, we're talking about training these teams. This is vastly different than just obviously training the non-technical. How do they stay on top of all that stuff? Is really is a challenge. I like to use the chefy analogy again. It's kind of like honing your skills, right? You have to
Hmm.
hone your knife, it has to keep it sharp. You have to keep people trained constantly.
Yeah.
And that's kind of where my company comes in for sure, this gamified platform where we'll take cyber tools and people will, have to use them, solve real world scenarios like where did the malware land? How did it get there? And, 30
Hmm.
tasks that are all related to that. Very challenging, right? So when you keep going through that kind of exercise, it helps keep your IT team sharp and on
Yep.
top of things.
For sure. I see Michelle has raised her hand, and I can make her a panelist for a moment if she wants to speak. Just let me know in the chat if that's the case. Or sometimes people put up their hand accidentally, so I just need to
Yeah, that happens.
check on
Oops.
that. But I'm going to just go back to our deck and use a little more guidance from our discussion. So gamification in IT training. Do you want to speak to that a little bit? What you've seen, the reasons why it's used and where it works and doesn't work?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gamification helps in many ways. There's a whole bunch of statistics that really talk to this. But basically, the benefits of gamified training, and we have to be careful how we use that because I've had it used in a pejorative kind of way where it's like, oh, let's get to the game. It's like it's not a game. It's a very sophisticated lab that includes gamification. I like to make that clear because some people really just don't. They think games and high tech just don't mix from a training point of view, right?
Mhm.
Again, it's that pejorative kind of
Well,
aspect.
there
Right?
actually, I've seen many posts on LinkedIn not too long ago.
Yeah,
Actually,
right.
one that comes to mind, I might have sent this to you, but during RSA, there was an announcement made by a vendor saying, "Hey, we now do gamified security awareness training," and it had a different spin on it than what some may have seen before. I personally have a little bit of an issue with that particular type that they were announcing, but all this to say, you know it sort of there were a lot of comments on it saying, security awareness isn't a game, or security isn't a game, so we
Right,
can't
right.
we can't let this become the theme. I think that's probably a
Yeah,
oversimplification of what it means, and gamification means different things to different people. One thing that
sure.
I try to delineate is there is gamification of business processes where you can have a target for everybody and you see, maybe it's a risk score or a phishing click rate score or report rate or whatever. And you're trying to get the organization to zero in on a metric, which is good, if you can set a goal and everybody works
Yeah,
toward it, as long as everybody knows what it takes to get there. And
yeah, exactly.
in my experience, a lot of people don't. And that's where I think gamification of the training is actually a different but really important part, because that creates the foundation for people to understand how they can actually, help move the dial, or whatever you want to call it,
Right, right.
in that sense of gamification.
Yeah, exactly. So let me talk about how we perceive gamification. First of all, there are stats that show that it increases engagement, right? That makes sense. It's kind of
Yeah.
fun.
Hmm.
And it motivates people because there's a leaderboard. As soon as you see a leaderboard, and I know I see the leaderboard right behind you there, we also, hey, it's fun. And I always find this dichotomy when people attend workshops. Those who are what I would call Microsoft, because a lot of the workshops we have are Microsoft tools. We're open to, hey, if anybody wants to have their tool set used. But they're going to be an expert on the tools as well as an expert on cyber. So they usually pop to the top of the leaderboard because they get the tools, they're already there. And again, this is more of that honing of the knife. They still have to really think through it. These are 3 to 4 hour workshops we're talking about, so it's not something trivial. So they're truly immersive workshops. But that leaderboard sometimes is what really drives people to keep going, and that's fun, right? That's just, and in terms of gamification, there's really a couple of things. One, you get points, kind of like
Hmm.
cash. In some
Yep.
games, you get some kind of monetary thing for doing
Sure.
something. And what do you use those points for? Upgrade your weapons, buy new shields. In our game, you get to buy hints, and the hints will help you solve the objectives. So
Mm.
that's really the realm of the gamification. There's also some cool avatars. We go to a third-party site called Ready Player Me, which is a great play off of
Oh,
Ready
cool.
Player One,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And you get to really customize your avatar, and people go crazy with them. They get crazy looking hair, and they have fun. So that's another part of it. They get to take on an alternate personality. They get to see themselves rise up the leaderboard. And so those who aren't as skilled, on the other hand, they get to use the points to find out the hints. The hints will walk them through the solution. So at the end of the day, everybody comes away going, okay, I'm learning something here. So if you're a novice, you still learn. If you're an expert, you're honing your skills. So I think that gamification does this exactly that. Motivates them, great engagement, improves your knowledge retention. You tend to remember things more when you're having
Hmm.
fun doing it. So those
Yeah.
are some of them. There's also cost-effective sides. It's more cost-effective
Hmm.
versus trying to build on a simulation of your own. You join in a pre-existing environment, and that's
Yeah.
another aspect to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, 10 years ago when I had customers asking me, can we make this stuff more fun? And,
Yeah.
what about a game in this area? And, I built my first Jeopardy game in HTML and JavaScript in like 2011, and it was painful. I mean,
Oh,
it worked from the sense it was just a trade show showcase thing for a customer organization. But what I learned was, having those little drivers where people, certain types of game mechanics, we call them, different approaches to or features of the games and the platform actually drive people's behavior in different ways. So, just having a visually dynamic kind of experience makes people engage at first, right? But that's not going to keep them
absolutely.
there if they're not learning things or are not having fun. And so you have to have other things like interactivity and giving people a chance to input and see, the
Yeah.
responses really quickly.
I mean, cyber training is inherently boring, let's face it, especially if it's PowerPoint by death. So we always try to make it kind of fun, right? And I'll even go back pre-McAfee. I said as a consultant, I also did a lot of training at Newbridge. I'm from the Ottawa area
Oh
like you.
yeah,
Remember Newbridge in the day, right?
I do.
Then they became Alcatel, but I was doing all their new hire training, and I had a Jeopardy game, to your point too. And it just, people lived for that. I mean, they came to it. It got word within the whole building basically, and people would come to these workshops because they really wanted to show off their stuff. So yeah, it's definitely a motivator. Right? You kind of bring a bit of fun into it. It mixes it
Yeah.
up, keeps it from being totally boring and all that good stuff.
And to, back to the point about cost effectiveness, it takes a lot of time and effort to create
Sure.
a game or a simulation that is gamified that,
Oh yeah.
completely meets your requirements, if you've got a certain set of requirements. And that's one of the reasons we built the ClickArmor platform the way we did, to make it more modular and, based on primitives, so you could actually create a lot of content very quickly. So that part of it does make things cost effective if you can use a platform like Circadence or ClickArmor.
Yeah, and you can find, I love the way you're able to do that customization. So if there's a new kind of thing, like I was even thinking about how there's now these new Facebook scams and stuff. You can
Mm.
probably pop up and create a security awareness just around that because you're very nimble how you can create stuff. I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that's brilliant. I want to go back to just one last thing though. When we were
yeah,
talking about training for IT security professionals,
yeah,
there's just one last thing. It's kind of like the elephant in the cyber room, if you will.
yeah,
And that's the insider threat
yeah,
situation, right? It's kind of a sad truth, but there are people who have, made bad
yeah,
lifestyle choices.
yeah,
They get themselves somehow badly in debt, and then they become vulnerable to being bribed, right?
yeah.
That's a real thing for sure. And basically, what they're being asked to do is create, because they have the ability to
Hmm.
create a portal in the back door, perhaps, and then for a handsome amount of cash, provide the
Yeah.
credentials. Um, so, does that fit into IT security cyber training? It does in many ways because, it's being aware that that's a possible
Hmm.
situation and being able to make sure you don't allow that to happen in your organization is something you really do have to consider.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think a lot of it comes down to having the IT team understand what what their advanced privileges mean, in
Yeah,
terms of responsibility, right? They are not just a regular user, they have more power, and with more power comes responsibility, but they also have a broader perspective on the organization. They can spot things that, may not be an incident, but that might be a vulnerability that
yeah.
needs to be raised in awareness to management. And so I think when insiders become an issue, and some of these guys have access, and they have, as you said, some life problems that are driving them sometimes even to become vulnerable to external influence, from espionage and things like that, right? So people can be turned to actually be not really an intentional insider, but they get sort of tricked into it, and all of a sudden they're
Yeah.
facing some kind of extortion, and you can't blame them at that point,
Yeah,
but
that's
but
right.
you actually have to educate people on what those things look like. When you get approached by somebody to do a little favor, what are the things that you have to watch out for.
Yeah.
So
It takes a certain amount of vigilance for sure. And yeah, it's just one of those things nobody likes to talk about, but it does happen, not very frequently, but that's more of a corner case,
yep,
insider threat. But
yep.
it is, there's entire tool sets designed to monitor risky behavior and adjust policies on the fly so that those people are handled slightly differently from a policies and
Yep.
control point of view. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, so I have to apologize. This week I didn't get our poll questions put into the Zoom feature, so it's not as automated as it usually is. But it's still worth asking questions to the audience, I think. Number one poll question, and after we ask it, I'd like people to enter some comments in the chat. But Chris and I will also just sort of look into the issues in this poll question. Other than vendor training on security products, what training does your organization provide to IT team members? Is it, just an acceptable use uh, agreement for privileged users? Some organizations have that, some don't actually, but it's a good idea to have one. Advanced security concepts, the things we talked about, cloud and other things that IT teams need to understand better, and SIM. And then voluntary security training. I know a lot of people take SANS courses for forensics or things, but it's more of an interest thing, and maybe almost a career path precursor, right? Rather than being training for the position that they're in. But there are other soft skill things like communications that people might be taking. So would love people to enter in the chat sort of what they see in their organization in terms of these types of training options that IT teams can have. So if you want to start entering those, I'll ask Chris, what do you think of these particular different modes of training?
These categories are so important. Yeah. We do tend to focus so much on the technical, but the soft skills, the communication skills are so important. I would hire somebody who's almost a better communicator than they are a technical person, because you can teach technical, but it's hard to teach good personality. You know what I'm saying? But having the ability to understand that that's an important part of the job. Sometimes people
Yeah.
forget that that's really there. So communication skills, the soft skills are also super important. Yeah.
Awesome. I see Patrick has raised his hand. I just wondered if, Patrick, do you want to speak to everybody in the panel? I'm just going to give him a chance to, if I can find him here. Yeah. I'm going to say allow Patrick to talk. There he is. Patrick, you had something to comment on? Maybe not.
Are
All
you
right.
muted or?
Uh, he may not have intended to speak, so I
All
just
right.
want to give him a
Not a problem.
chance. But there are a couple of comments in the chat. Things like tabletop simulations. That's a really good example from Andrea. It's not something that you typically
Keyboards.
get from a vendor, right? I mean, you can hire vendors to run tabletops, but how do you do it? I know we had a session not long ago where Fleetus mentioned he basically does red team operations as well, or has, some organizations have full-time red team members, right, that are always trying to look for things, and they can create training out of those things.
Oh yeah,
So
and I was going to say kudos to the organization that funds that kind of a
Yep.
capability, because that's rare, I'd say. That's really to Felitus's point, when I heard him speaking about that, I thought that's amazing. I'm just not sure how many organizations commit to that at the senior levels. The security is one of those have to haves almost. It's kind of like house
Hmm.
security practically. It's like some people don't invest in home security until they've been broken into. And I think
Yeah.
that's unfortunately a lot of how it works in the industry. You have a breach, and then you go, okay, what did we do wrong? Well, you did nothing initially, so now you have to do something better,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But having somebody who's full time on staff, having CTFs, capture the flags, red team,
Hmm.
blue team exercises, that's brilliant. If you're doing that on a regular basis, you're really going to be in that mode where
Yeah.
you've got your knives all beautifully sharpened, all
Yeah.
in all
I've
ways.
seen some really good value come from tabletop exercises for
Hmm.
sure. And I see two sort of modes of tabletops. And maybe it's a continuum or a spectrum, but two ways you can think about it. One is it's a way of testing your incident response plan,
Hmm. Yeah.
to see, you think you've got it in place, you've got all the stuff on paper, does it really work, right? Do people
Yeah.
know how to reference those things and what to do, and is the documentation really correct? And you don't really know sometimes until you do this test.
Oh,
So a lot of
absolutely.
times it's a tabletop is positioned as it's not worth doing unless you've actually got your incident response process and plan in place, because it won't necessarily tell you as much, about the finer points. But I've also seen it looked at from the point of view of our executives really haven't done this before, and they don't really appreciate the importance of some elements of the security and even the communications around security. So we could do a tabletop that is really designed just to raise awareness about how important some elements of our operations are that need to be, better defined, and the importance of having an incident response plan. Because if you start a tabletop with that in mind,
Mm.
then you can easily focus in on and say, well, wouldn't it have been nice if we had a prioritization of tickets or incidents, right? And so that can, I think, also be very helpful.
Oh, yeah, it's like emergency response preparedness. I remember a friend way back in the day when I was younger, in his room, he had a ladder below his window. And I was going, what's this about? And he says, oh, that's my dad. In case there's a fire, we have a way to get out the window. I thought, holy cow, talk about preparedness, right? But it's one thing to talk about what to do, but if the plan doesn't work, if the ladder doesn't make it all the way down to the ground, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So you're right. The tabletop kind of forces you to work backwards. If you're saying we should do this, it's like, okay,
Hmm.
do we have an actual plan in place that's viable?
Yep.
And if you do, then you're going to definitely find the holes, because you just can't find those holes,
Yeah.
those discrepancies, the things that, oh, should have thought of that, until you
Yep.
go through an exercise. But again, that's a big commitment on an organization to do that. I find the SOC of the secure operations centers of today are probably a lot more lean than they used to be, which is unfortunate. Go back, they probably were better funded, or maybe salaries were less and they could afford more. Now, the bottom line is I find that working with fewer people, and sometimes it's because you can't find qualified people to work in the SOC, so it's a challenge just to hire people.
Right.
But when you're working with fewer people, it means you're just all hands on deck, just trying to handle the basic fires that are coming up.
Hmm.
Great AI is like an extra hand in there tapping the shoulder saying, hey, I see these things going on. I think you should be looking at these top five. Great. That's again what these tools are great for, whether it's machine learning or AI, all that good stuff. It's going to bubble up the top 10 things you should be looking at, Scott, as opposed
Hmm.
to what should I be doing? That's brilliant. But at
Yeah.
the end of the day, I still say that those teams are kind of light, and trying to say, well, let's do this tabletop exercise can take a real commitment from the company to put those resources in place. So
Yeah, for
that's
sure.
what I find is a
Um,
challenge.
I had a second open question that we could discuss, but you already kind of covered it. It was around the idea of the difference between IT team training and general awareness training.
Mm.
So I'm skipping along a little bit just so that we can keep focused. Another poll question that I would have asked if I'd had these things automated, or I will ask anyway, is does your organization have role-based security training KPIs or targets for your IT team members? So simple answer, yes, no, I don't know. If you have role-based training, maybe just put something in the chat about what it is that you typically do. I'll throw out, there are some typical ones. Obviously, SOC or security operations centers. There are, certain second, third level help desk people that have more security privileges and roles. So those are things I think we see quite often. A role that I've seen recently that is becoming really interesting for the fact that it's not very well covered. It's kind of a gray area between technical IT team training and security awareness training, and that is SaaS application administrators, which are typically not part of the IT team. They're often part of the business units, but they have privileges and they can be impacting, information and resources and workflows in a similar way that any IT team member with privileges could.
Oh, it's such a great point. And I remember back in the days of, let me see, I don't know how long I have to go back, but that was a big issue, is that people that were working on these kind of SaaS environments were really experts at the tools at creating and maintaining SaaS, but not really experts in security, and weren't taking that into consideration as they had to kind of roll out their programs, right? So it's almost like an afterthought, the security aspect to it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of times, if you think about the timeline for adopting some SaaS solution, right? You'll do a couple of analysis, you get a short list, you decide you're going to do a trial maybe on one or more of them. You sign a few people up, we got a trial account, hey, we're going to convert this, we're going to make it real, and all of a sudden you got 20 or 30 people on the platform and there is no security plan.
Yeah.
Or who should be doing what, and what are the rules, right?
Kind of a total afterthought. Yeah, I've seen that too.
Yeah. So the responses primarily from the group are basically that there are no real KPIs around IT team member security training. So that's concerning. I think, we want to, it's almost in some ways treated better by security awareness training programs, where there is, at least from a compliance point of view, we talk a lot about how compliance is bad in a lot of ways because it doesn't really get you to a secure state guaranteed. But I think there is an element of it that gets you to a better state than not having anything, right? And so having a compliance target or a KPI that says I have so many people that have completed training, it's a start. I think that's a great start. But certainly we want to be able to look at, what are the things that mean something to the risk for the organization? And, do you want to try and get people to a certain level of proficiency in some of those skills? And how do you do that? Especially when it's not a vendor or, commercial solution.
Yeah.
Can you create your own training program that has proficiency metrics in it?
Yeah, that's a big issue for sure. Compliance, it's one of those things. I have my own opinion about compliance. Compliance is kind of like home insurance, you can kind of transfer the risk to somebody else, but being able to show people as being compliant, that's a nut I don't even know how to crack myself. Meaning, I just think it's such an overwhelming aspect, and I haven't had any hands in on that. I've never done any of that sort of thing, but you are right. You have to be able to track, the fact that people have been able to take the training, how effective is it? And it takes money and resources to do that too. So you have to have an organization that's committed to doing that sort of
Yeah, I
focused.
mean, I guess the way I would start doing that, just as tips for anybody who's looking at trying to get there, is sit down and look at your general, I guess, information flows, and things like if some of these tools that are used for other purposes, like doing a business impact assessment, right?
Yeah.
When you talk about business continuity, a business impact assessment is really just looking at all of your business processes and prioritizing them in terms of what is most important to your business. And if this process doesn't work, or
Fails.
it's out and it's failed, it's costing us something, right? And
Yeah, what's the
so
impact?
I think if we start from that point of view and say, what are the things that are most impacting our operations? And then start looking at the dependencies. What does it depend on? Who are the people that need to be doing their job properly? And if this person's away while we have an outage, we could be in big trouble, right? Or if we have an incident, ransomware incident, and somebody's away. So look at it more from I think the business continuity and the business impact would be a good place to start, where you can start to look at how do we want to structure a program for being able to track it, and say, okay, those are the people that we really need to have either redundant or proficient, in those roles, so that we can make sure that our business is protected.
Yeah, we don't offer anything like that at Circadence. Ours is pretty much hands-on tools. Do you have a security awareness program that works around that kind of concept?
Sorry?
For compliance, like what you're just talking
Oh,
about, all those
yeah.
good things.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've
Yeah,
actually got because security awareness as a topic is interesting. When you look at all of the different compliance regimes, it's whether it's PCI
right,
or even the privacy areas like GDPR,
right.
SOC 2, ISO, CMMC, all of those things, they all kind of ask for the same things when it comes to security awareness. They just say it in different ways.
Yeah.
And so we actually have a security basics course that covers, 10 or 12 different areas, everything from passwords to working remotely to, wireless security, physical security. Each of those areas is covered, and we can actually check that people do have knowledge in each of those areas as they go through it.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah,
And
that's the
we have
important part.
variants of that security basics in each of those regimes where we modify the content where necessary. But it's
Where you
it's
focus it.
actually not really that necessary to change it across the different
Right.
regimes or compliance standards. I see
Yes.
Patrick has his hand up again. I'm going to see if
Patrick
he
last
has
time
it.
said he was accidental, so I
Yeah, it
don't know
could
if
be
it's
accidental again. I'll have to see. Anyway, Patrick, if you would like to say something, do enter something in the chat and we'll let you up again. And as long as it wasn't another finger problem. Um, so I think, we've covered a lot of the open questions I wanted to go through. So at this point, I typically like to go into um, an area of the session where we just sort of reflect on some of the key topics. We look at it from the point of view of executives. What are some of the things that we've talked about in this session that can help executives in terms of security? And I think one of them is perhaps the whole idea of the tabletops, because tabletop exercises work best when they're supported from the top down and when there's
Yeah.
participation from the top down. And they're the ones, if you did one of those tabletops that's just designed to help highlight the fact that you need improvements in certain areas. That's probably maybe one of the best insights from what we talked about here is, promote that idea with your executives so that you can get some more participation and, movement in the area of improving your security training and processes.
And senior management's often all about cost, right? I mean, ROI, what's the return on investment? So
Yeah.
it's a different kind of ROI. Of course, you just have to show how devastating it'll be to the organization if they don't do something, right? So it's
Yep.
that's part of what you have to do as your sales pitch to get them to buy in, and it's a tough sell sometimes, depending on the organization and the leadership team.
Yep. Another way we look at it is what value have we brought to implementers like the security managers and training managers who are struggling with some of these things? What tips did we cover today that could really help them? I'm just thinking back myself. If you had any thoughts or if people have um, any suggestions, we had a question from Patrick just saying, will the webinar have a replay? Yes, we record all these sessions and we will post them. We post them on YouTube, but we also have the Cybersecurity Awareness Forum site. If you just join there, then you'll get posting of notifications when each of the recordings comes up. So yeah, just going back to our helping the managers and implementers, I think having a little more confidence of, we may not have mentioned this, but while I think of it, having some confidence in going to speak to the technical security managers. So maybe you're a learning and development manager or you're a security awareness training manager, and you want to work on some of these areas to help the IT teams become more secure. I think the important thing is just to realize that you've got a lot of value because you have the voice and you have the visibility with executives usually, where you can speak to the IT teams and say, what are the things that are really important for your teams to understand and to work more securely, and maybe propose some of these ideas of doing a tabletop or doing a business impact assessment to say, where are our critical processes that do need support from people being trained, et cetera. So
Yeah.
I think that's one way that the managers at the management level can help out.
Yeah, definitely.
And from an individual point of view, often we're looking at individuals as home consumers, but let's think of them as people with careers
Yeah.
and say, I want to increase my value in my over my career. What can I do to become a better IT team member or more secure team member, or have better value when I'm looking for a job in security?
Yeah, and be the one that is suggesting these ideas too. Always, I was always doing that in my career too, is always, hey, I'll take on that role. I'll be the one that spearheads the team that is going to look into what's lacking in our organization from a security point of view, how we can make improvements, sort of
Mhm.
become that manager, promote it heavily within.
Yeah. And I think as was raised in the chat, it can be challenging to convince senior management and chief whatever officers, of the value of security and security awareness and training. So, if the topics we talked about today maybe touched on some of those things, but you're not completely sure, then feel free to reach out to Chris or myself. Chris will probably enter his LinkedIn contact information in the chat, and
Yeah.
I'll make sure people can ask him questions if necessary.
Yeah, let me do that now because unfortunately I do have to sort of have a
Oh
hard
yeah, you have
stop.
to take off. I sorry, forgot about that.
You
So
take
I will
off, eh?
let you go, Chris. If you want to have any last words, or if you have to run, that's fine.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to have. I'm going to just put my LinkedIn here. So yeah, that'd be lovely to hear from anybody. Hopefully this was helpful. Big fan of what you do for sure. And let me see if I can just, yeah, there's my alert telling me I gotta get out of
Yeah.
here.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate you
Oh,
joining us.
it was a blast. Thank you so much. I'm just going to try and clip this out here. I think I got it. Thanks, Scott. Let me just paste that into my chat here and hopefully I don't blow it. Boom. That
There we
looks like
are.
it's right.
Awesome.
LinkedIn.
Perfect. Well, like I said, thanks again, Chris, and I'd love to have you back as a panelist in future as well.
I'd
So
love to do it.
some
Yeah,
great
look
insights.
forward to it. Thanks
Okay.
so much for inviting me. I really had fun today. This was great stuff.
All
So
right. I'm going to carry on as Chris leaves, just with some housekeeping and things that you guys might be interested in. So, one thing I wanted to talk about was usually I put a little bit of a plug in for ClickArmor, but I wanted to share a little bit of a story and an observation that I have, and that is when all of when all you have for building security culture is a static training content, learning management system, and phishing simulations, then every employee looks like a target because you're trying to test them using phishing simulations. So ClickArmor can actually help you improve employee understanding, knowledge retention, and readiness. And the story that I wanted to share is that I think it came up in the chat earlier. Sometimes we're overconfident of, or the IT teams may be overconfident, and it's a good reason to make sure that they are trained well. In a case of myself being overconfident one time, I may have told this story when you were on a past session, but I'll go into a little more detail this time. I actually do consulting for different places, especially government departments, and often they require people to do, onboarding, training agreements, etc. And so I get bothered as I come in as a new contractor in an organization. I get a notification, and so when that happened one time last year. I discovered as I logged in, I got my email. It says you have to take some training, and so I said, okay, well that's par for the course. So I click on it and it says, oops, you've been phished. So it was a phishing test. And so I failed the phishing test. I'm a guy that talks about how we should be teaching people about phishing. How can I fail these tests? Well, it's not because I didn't know what to look for. It's because I actually was just not in the right frame of mind at the right time. And it's sometimes enough to just remind people you got to slow down and you got to think a little bit more about your own context. But a lot of people feel very targeted by these types of assessments. And I know for a fact that when I clicked on that link and I saw that landing page that says you've been phished, uh, a whole bunch of adrenaline kicks in. And in fact, I remember nothing about what I saw on that landing page. And I'm not sure that means I need more phishing training. But what I think it means is if we had more practice facing the kinds of threats that people face in the real world and practicing them before we do the live phishing simulations, then people would actually be better able to retain the knowledge and apply it in the right situation. So that's my story around how we can be overconfident. I was certainly overconfident in that situation. But if you'd had ClickArmor in that situation where you were able to exercise people's skills before you test them, that's something I think that's of value to fill that gap between the static content and the phishing simulations. So everybody looks like a target when you're just using phishing simulations. I also wanted to announce a fun thing we're going to start doing. We did this a couple of years ago, if anybody remembers. We have something we call the 5-day Cyber Night Challenge. And all it is people who sign up will be invited onto the ClickArmor platform to compete against other people who've signed up. And we'll post some short training courses there, but we also have something we call the daily or weekly challenges. Normally we present them weekly and people will get reminders, but we're going to do it in a condensed 1 week period. So every day you will get a phishing or some other kind of assessment or training or whatever. It's going to be a 3-minute thing, so it takes very little time, but it helps you experience the gamified platform and what the interactive kind of experience looks like and how compelling it can be for people, especially when you see that you're building a streak of completing those 3-minute challenges. People really do respond to that. Another thing I wanted to announce is that in a week, on June 5th, next Wednesday, we do our cybersecurity awareness forums every other week. So normally we'll do one in 2 weeks, but next week at this time, I'm actually going to be on a webinar with the folks from Conceal and with Andrea Delia, who will actually be talking about some real life cyber incidents that occurred. And we're going to analyze them in terms of what the main themes were, what really caused those things, and then sort of go back in time and say, what would have happened if we could have stopped it, either technically or through better employee awareness. So it'll be a fun webinar. Everybody is welcome to join us on that one in 1 week. And I also wanted to mention we've put together a promotional deal for quick start bundles that feature ClickArmor and Conceal. So it's the training going together with the AI-based browser isolation. So I did a little demo in the last session for that. I'm not going to do it again, but really good deal, very good deal for small businesses to start putting better protection in both on the people side and the technology side. And lastly, our next session will be we'll be doing in 2 weeks, as I said, June 12th at 1 p.m. And this one's going to be really interesting. It's going to be on combating fraud due to cyber attacks. Some really interesting stories. I'm hoping to have a special guest who's been really deeply involved in some of these things. So hope you can join us for that. And with that, I'll say goodbye and thanks very much, everybody, for joining us this time. We'll talk to you next time.